The car engine coughed twice and then stopped. Teresa watched her son get out, open the trunk, pull out her worn-out bag, and drop it onto the red earth like a sack of garbage. He didn't say a word. He didn't look back. He got back in the car and drove off, raising a cloud of dust that wrapped around the 72-year-old woman like a shroud. Teresa stood still, her legs trembling under her sun-faded dress as the sound of the engine faded beyond the horizon. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just looked at the Savannah spreading out around her like a hungry mouth. The African sun shows no mercy. At 3 in the afternoon, during the dry season in the Masai Mara, the temperature climbs above 35 degrees Celsius. Teresa knew that, even though she had never set foot outside Nairobi before that day. She also knew that without water, without shelter, and with no one looking for her, she might have 2 days to live. She sat on the bag. Inside were a change of clothes, a faded photo of her husband who had died 15 years earlier, and a pack of dry cookies she had bought for the trip. Her son had told her he was taking her to see the nature reserve. A birthday gift. Just another lie in a life built on lies. 800 kilometers away, at the Sekanani monitoring station, David Ochieng was analyzing data from GPS collars when his satellite phone rang. A wildlife veterinarian for 19 years and supervisor of the big cat tracking program at the Masai Mara Conservancy, David had seen it all. Lions poisoned by herders, elephants torn apart by poachers, cheetah cubs sold as pets. But this call was different. A commercial pilot had seen something unusual during a tourist flight. A motionless human figure near a giant termite mound, 3 hours off-road from the nearest airstrip. And something large next to her. Something sand-colored moving slowly. David grabbed the medical kit and the keys to the Land Cruiser. He didn't yet know what he would find. He didn't know that this call would change everything he thought he knew about lions. Teresa had walked for hours before she found the termite mound, a 4-meter-tall structure of earth shaped by the wind into what looked like the columns of a forgotten cathedral. At its base, an opening big enough to offer shade. She dragged herself inside, her back pressed against the cool soil, her eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. That's when she saw it. The lion lay on its side, breathing short and uneven. Its right flank was a mess of dried blood and raw flesh. A snare wound, deep down to the bone, had sliced through muscle and left its ribcage exposed. It was a full-grown male, probably 8 years old, with a dark mane that must once have been magnificent. Now, it was dull, caked with dust and blood. Teresa stopped breathing. The lion opened one eye. Amber, streaked with darker lines, clouded with pain. It stared at her. Neither of them moved. Teresa had lived 72 years without ever seeing a lion up close. She had heard the stories, of course. Children torn apart in villages. Herders losing entire herds in one night. Tourists snapping death with their smartphones. But nothing had prepared her for this. The animal's physical presence, its sharp scent of musk and blood, the wet sound of its breathing. And nothing had prepared her for what she saw in its eyes. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't rage. It was something Teresa knew all too well. She had seen it in the mirror every morning for the last 15 years, since she buried her husband and found herself alone with a son who hated her. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes when someone stops fighting. The lion closed its eye. It didn't growl, it didn't rise. It stayed still, as if it had decided the old woman wasn't even worth the effort of an attack. Teresa should have run. Every instinct, every story, every piece of wisdom she'd gathered over a lifetime screamed at her to flee. But her legs wouldn't move, and something inside her chest, something she thought had died years ago, whispered an impossible question. If we're both here to die, why die alone? She sat down. Slowly, her bones creaking in protest, she leaned against the opposite wall of the shelter. 2 meters separated her from the lion. 2 meters, and a lifetime of fear. She pulled the pack of cookies from her bag, broke one in half. The crisp snap made the animal flinch. Its eye opened again, alert, pupils narrowing. Teresa tossed half a cookie toward him. It landed about a foot from his nose. The lion sniffed. Slowly, using what seemed like all the breath he had left, he reached out his tongue and licked it. Then he left it there. It wasn't hunger. Teresa understood in that moment. Hunger wasn't what kept him alive. It was something else. Maybe the same thing keeping her alive. She ate her half of the cookie, looked at the lion looked at her. And somehow, in that red earth shelter in the heart of the savannah, 2 creatures who were supposed to be mortal enemies signed a silent truce. If you believe love knows no boundaries, hit like now. The first night was the longest of Teresa's life. The sun sank like a stone, and with the darkness came the sounds. The savannah at night is a concert of death. Distant howls, sharp cries, the rustle of tall grass bending under invisible steps. Teresa curled up in her part of the shelter, arms wrapped around her knees, trembling despite the lingering heat rising from the earth. It was around midnight when she heard them. The hyenas arrived in silence, like shadows taking shape. Teresa heard them before she saw them, their heavy breathing, their high-pitched giggles that seemed to mock every living thing. There were at least 4, maybe 5. They moved around the termite mound, sniffing the air, following the scent of the lion's blood. One of them stuck its snout into the opening. Teresa saw its eyes shine in the dark. Yellow, cold, calculating. The hyena stared at her, assessing. Then it shifted its gaze to the wounded lion. An easy meal, 2 easy meals. The lion moved. It happened so fast, Teresa couldn't make sense of it. One moment he was lying still, barely breathing. The next, he was on his feet, mouth wide open in a roar that shook the ground beneath her. The sound was overwhelming. Not the deep, majestic roar from documentaries. This was an explosion of pure fury, a shockwave that hit Teresa like a slap. The hyenas stepped back. The one at the entrance stumbled, rolled in the dust, and got back up with a yelp of fear. The lion dragged himself toward the opening, 3 legs barely holding up his weight. The wound on his side reopened, and Teresa saw fresh blood drip onto the ground. But he didn't stop. He placed himself in front of the entrance, his body blocking the only way in, and growled again. The hyenas hesitated. They looked at each other the way predators do when weighing the odds. A wounded lion could be prey, but a wounded lion that still growled was a gamble. They chose not to take it. They retreated into the darkness, their mocking calls slowly fading away. The lion stood guard for an hour, maybe 2. Teresa couldn't see his face, only the dark mass of his body outlined against the starry sky. Then, when the sounds of the savannah returned to their usual rhythm, the lion collapsed. He didn't return to his corner. He stayed where he was, wounded, side turned outward, his body forming a barrier between the Teresa and the world. The woman reached out a trembling hand. Her fingers brushed the mane. It was coarse, rougher than she had imagined, and warm. The lion didn't react. Maybe he was too weak, maybe too tired, or maybe, in a way that defied all logic, he understood. Teresa fell asleep with her hand resting on the lion's side. She could feel his heart beating beneath her fingers, slow but steady, like an ancient drum. At dawn, when she woke, the lion was licking his wound, and Teresa knew she had to do something. The second day was the day of water. Teresa vaguely remembered her son mentioning a river, somewhere to the west. He had said it with disdain, like it was a meaningless tourist detail. But now that detail was all she had. She rose at sunrise, her bones aching, her throat burning with thirst. The lion watched her. He didn't move, but his eyes followed her every step with a focus that seemed almost human. Teresa pointed west. A ridiculous gesture, speaking to a lion. But by now, the ridiculous had become her new normal. She started walking. After 10 steps, she turned around. The lion was following her. He dragged himself across the savannah with fierce determination, 3 legs making up for the wounded one. Head low, breath heavy. Every step must have been agony. But he kept going, staying about 5 meters behind Teresa. They found the river after 2 hours. It was little more than a trickle in that season, but water still ran between the smooth stones. Teresa knelt and drank until she thought she might burst. Then she turned toward the lion. He had stopped 10 meters from the water. He looked at the river but didn't come closer. Teresa understood. Drinking meant letting your guard down. It meant exposing your neck. For an injured predator, it was a deadly risk. The woman cupped water in her hands. She walked slowly toward the lion, the liquid dripping between her fingers. She stopped a meter away from him. The lion lowered his head. He drank from her hands. It was at that moment that David Ochieng, driving his Land Cruiser, picked up the GPS signal from the collar. The lion he had been searching for over the past 3 days. The dominant male of the Musiara pride who had gone missing after being injured by a poacher's snare was alive. And according to the coordinates, he was near the Talek River. There was something else with him. The pilot hadn't been wrong. A week later, David still couldn't explain what he had seen. He had found the lion lying in the shade of an acacia tree. Beside him, leaning against the trunk, sat an elderly woman stroking his mane like he was a house cat. "Don't come closer," Teresa said without looking up. "He doesn't like people." David laughed, a nervous, disbelieving sound. Then he saw the lion lift his head and stare at him with eyes that promised death. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "that's a wild lion, a full-grown male. You shouldn't be alive." Teresa finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired, burned by the sun, but there was something in them David had never seen before, a kind of impossible peace. "You're right," she replied. "I shouldn't be," but he decided otherwise. The days that followed were a delicate negotiation. David couldn't leave Teresa out in the savannah, but the woman refused to abandon the lion. The animal's wound needed urgent veterinary care, but any attempt to approach him triggered growls that made the ground vibrate. Dr. Amara Okonkwo, an ethologist from the University of Nairobi, arrived on the 3rd day. She had been studying lion behavior for 23 years. She had never seen anything like this. "It's impossible," she wrote in her field journal that evening. "The bond between this woman and the lion defies every known behavioral model. The animal shows clear signs of active protection, as if he has accepted the human into his family group. I have no explanation." It was Teresa who found the solution. Each day, she walked a little closer to the Land Cruiser, speaking to the lion in a calm voice. Each day, the lion followed her a few meters, a slow, patient dance built on trust. On the 10th day, Teresa managed to lead him onto the trailer. "Stay until the end," because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about lions. That's when the poachers arrived. There were 3 of them, armed with hunting rifles and skinning knives. They had followed the trail of the wounded lion for days, knowing a weakened animal would be an easy kill. His body was worth a fortune: mane for traditional rituals, bones for Asian medicine, claws as trophies. They didn't expect to find David's team, and they didn't expect an old woman to stand in front of their target. "You'll have to go through me," Teresa said. The poachers laughed. One of them raised his rifle. The lion roared. It was different from the roar that night with the hyenas. Deeper, older. A sound from a time when lions were gods and humans prayed for their mercy. The poachers froze. The rifle shook, and then came the sound of blades in the sky. The Kenya Wildlife Service helicopter appeared over the hill like a giant dragonfly. The poachers looked at each other, realized the fight was over, and ran into the bush. 2 of them were captured that same evening. The 3rd was never found. Teresa watched the helicopter land, watched the men in uniform step out, watched the veterinarian prepare the tranquilizer. She knelt beside the lion, took his face in her hands. His amber eyes looked back at her, and Teresa saw something that felt terribly like goodbye. "They'll find you a safe place," she whispered. "A place where no one will ever hurt you again, I promise." The lion closed his eyes. When the needle entered his side, he was already asleep. 3 years later, David Ochieng received a letter. It was handwritten, the script shaky but firm. The return address was a nursing home in Nairobi. The signature at the bottom simply read, Teresa. "Dear Doctor," the letter began. "I know you don't believe in fairy tales, but some fairy tales are more real than reality. My son came to visit me last month. First time in 3 years. He wanted my money, of course. I told him to go to hell. I told him I had found a better family in the Savannah. He didn't understand, he couldn't. But you did, you saw it. They told me that Simba, yes, I gave him a name, I know it sounds silly, is doing well, the wound has healed, he's even found a new pride in the reserve. 3 females and 2 cubs, a family, just like me. The nurses here are kind, they bring me tea every afternoon. But every night before I sleep, I close my eyes and go back to that red earth shelter. I feel his breath. I feel his heart beating beneath my fingers. I feel his warmth against my back. I'm not afraid of dying anymore, Doctor, because I know that somehow a part of me is already there. In the Savannah, with him. Thank you for saving us. Both of us." David folded the letter. He stood up from his desk and looked out the window toward the horizon where the sun was setting over the Savannah. In the O-Pajeta Reserve, 200 kilometers away, a lion with a scar on his right flank raised his head to the sky. His roar echoed through the evening, deep and ancient, and somewhere in the world, an old woman smiled in her sleep. Some bonds don't need blood, some bonds don't need words. Some bonds exist simply because 2 souls, in a moment of absolute despair, chose not to die alone. Subscribe for more incredible stories from the animal world and share with someone who needs to believe in the impossible.